Hey, my name is Zachary Ferretti, aka Chino.co online. And today, what we're going to do is go through some of my recent images from a trip I took to the Faroe Islands. For those of you who don't know, the Faroe Islands are a archipelago, and I think they're a municipality of Denmark, and it's in like the North Atlantic. It's a beautiful, beautiful place with awesome scenery, awesome landscapes. What we're going to do is review 13 images of mine that I took while I was there. I'm just going to go through them, talk about what I like about them, what I don't like about them, how I'd improve them if I were to go back. And yeah. Okay, so number one, we have this image, which is the cliffs over Calor Lighthouse. And what I like about this image is I think the way that the curves of the here I'm gonna use a brush really quick just to paint what I'm talking about. I think the curves of the scene bring the viewer's eye through the whole image from the footpath in the bottom left all the way up to the cliff at the very kind of the pinnacle of the scene in the image. So I like that. However, that said, I do think that the balance of the image isn't entirely there. I think that it's a little bit tight, and I really struggled with getting an image that was wide enough to capture the immensity of this pinnacle. And honestly, I failed to. I think this is a beautiful image and one that I'd love to I love looking at it, but I think it could be better. And I think if I were to go back, what I would try and do is get like a wider lens and try and really frame up like the whole valley that's off to this side of the scene, in addition to the main cliff face right here. And I did do that, but I think that you could spend more time there and probably get a better image. Okay, moving on. Next image. Now this one was super fun to take. So while we were there, both Sophie and I got really sick, and we were struggling to do some of the longer distance hikes that we had planned on doing. This one was a kind of like simpler one. It was the black sand beaches of Saxon, and I like this image a lot. I think the curve leads the viewer's eye into the scene towards like this focal point right here, which I think is like a good, that's where there's a little bit of dramatic light, and I think that the fog of this valley right here also brings the viewer's eye in towards like the bit of light that's happening like right here. However, I did struggle when taking this image to compose something with like an interesting foreground. The water, as you can see, was like very, very calm that day. There wasn't really much in the way of waves, so there wasn't really like anything for me to photograph there. And there wasn't really much like foreground interest. Usually, like if I go to a beach, I'll try and get some like driftwood or some like interesting rocks or sand in the front. And really, that was not there, was not present. So, I think it was a good image, and I think it was like as good as I could do in that moment. But I think it could be better. If I were to go back, I'd probably try and maybe get lower to the ground. But like I did also do that when I was there, and the results were okay, but not amazing. So I think, maybe this was just the best I could do with this scene in the moment. I did try and take some that were more like zoomed in and like were like a tied up image of just like this part that I'm like highlighting on the screen right now, where it was a very like close up shot of the fog and the light hitting the far off valley. But I found that didn't work as well as kind of the full scene here. All right. Next image that we're going to talk about is this image of Mykines. After arriving in Faroe, this was taken on our first night. We were photographing the sunset at Mjølfossur, which is a waterfall near Gasa Dalur, which is where we were staying on that for those first couple days. And while I did get some images of the waterfall that night, which were outstanding, we were treated to a super nice sunset. Um, this image of Mykines, I think, works really well. It's a excuse me. It's a really simple image. It's just the island and the break in the clouds. Like you can see, there's a very solid like cloud bank like over to the right hand side of the screen here, and then as it hits the peak of Mykines, it kind of breaks apart and like the clouds start going in different directions, which I think is pretty nice. I think if I were to try and improve this image, I'd probably try and do a longer exposure. I didn't have an ND filter or anything, so that I couldn't really like stop down the exposure to like 5, maybe 10 seconds, which I think would have been really nice, because I think the water in the foreground, it's a little bit not choppy, but there is motion there, and I think if I did like a long exposure and just got it to be like a sea of glass, I think that'd be a really interesting look for this image. All right, this was a really interesting one to take. So this was the same day that we photographed that one at Calor Lighthouse, and as you can see, there's a very different weather than that scene. When we got there, it was overcast, it was cloudy, it was dark, there wasn't much in the way of light, and then as the day went on, as we were waiting for our bus, the weather got better and better and better, and eventually, as we were walking back towards Trelawney's, which is the town we had started the hike from, we were walking past this old stone house. Now, I think this is a pretty strong image, and we're getting into the category of images where I'm just kind of like happy with it, and I wouldn't do a ton to change it. But I think this image, like I looked at the house from every different angle. I liked the way that the light, because the sun, if you can imagine, was like up here shooting down this way, which is why the like front of the building is like super well lit, and then the sides are in shadow. I think it looks really nice. I'd gotten low to the ground, and I zoomed in on I dropped my focus to just f4, so that when shooting this on the GFX, it was focusing right on the house and throwing everything out of focus. Nice bit of depth to the scene there. I think if I were to critique this image, what I would probably do is maybe try and I was using the 32 to 64, and I'd probably try and maybe use the 100 to 200. However, I think that would be too tight, and I think it'd be kind of like claustrophobic. But that would give even better depth, and maybe you could try and get like the illusion of it just being like cutting off the green grass on the bottom, and just having it be the building in the yellow sea with the blue background. I think that could be nice too. But again, I think this image works as it stands. Could probably crop it. I mean, I'm not going to try, but yeah. All right, next image. Yes, first impressions. This was a really fun one. So this was right when we had got to the Faroes, after a long trip out there. It's like me and Sophie were awake for like 36 hours straight. And we just had rain and clouds and fog the entire commute. We didn't really see the Faroes when we were coming upon them, and Copenhagen was dark. And yeah, so what we did was, as we were driving out, we saw the clouds began to clear, and it was just immaculate. It was so nice, and we got this beautiful image. I'm really happy with the way that it turned out, and I think that the color of the grass as it's beginning, like spring was beginning to come in the Faroes, and I think the like kind of yellowish hue turning into green is really nice, and I think it works well with the like sky in the background. I will admit, I think part of the reason I like this image is the sentimental value. Um, Compositionally, it's pretty simple. There's not much to like talk about in the way of like, oh man, this is just like the most dynamic image in the world. I think there's like some nice leading elements that brings you into like Maikines, like the road on this side here, and then the kind of like S curve of the of this like beach curving in towards the island, which I think kind of bring the viewer's eye into the middle of the scene. But yeah, not too much to talk about on that one. All right. So this is the image that I was talking about when I mentioned that we were photographing Maikines from Gasa Dalur, and we were photographing the Mulafosser waterfall as well. This is the waterfall. Now, I like this image a lot. I think if I were to try and critique it, and if I were to try and change it, what I'd probably try and focus on is kind of reframing the scene a little bit, which was hard because there were other photographers to the left and to the right of me, so I was kind of forced to stay in place and work within just the confines of, okay, how can I change my camera, and how can I change like where I'm like zooming or focusing, and I think that would probably be what I would try and change. I did play around with cropping the image and cropping it to be tighter, closer to just this scene, kind of cutting out this horizon, this empty bit over here. And it's good, but it doesn't make that much of a difference. I think maybe if I cut off some of the right-hand side of the scene as well, it could help with the like balancing the weight, because I do think that this part of the scene over here, it's a bit of empty space. I was trying to photograph the rocks and kind of give some interest in the scene, but I think it probably could be better. Yeah. But again, I do like the image. I think it's an interesting image of the waterfall of this scene, and I mean, the weather is amazing. The light was really nice that night. So overall, I'm pleased, but could be better. Okay, now we're beginning to get to the images where I'm really excited by them and really happy about them. But this camera is getting hot, so I'm gonna turn it off, let it cool down, and then we'll keep going in a little bit. Okay, I need to hurry this up because it's 9:41 and I'm at the BPL to record this, and the librarian just came and told me that they're actually gonna be shutting down the library because it's so hot because the AC is broken. So I don't have long before I might get kicked out. So I'm gonna try and kind of like, I'm on image 7, so there's just a few left. I'm gonna try and kind of like speed up and talk about these a little bit faster. Okay, so number 1, if you know me and you know my photography, I love photographing the scenes that I'm walking through, or like the trails that I'm walking in. This is an example where I photographed the road that I was driving on. Obviously I parked and then I came back, but I really liked the framing that the scene offered of the road leading the viewer right up to the cloud, with the cloud on the mountaintop. I think it's a really like compelling scene, and I was really excited when I was taking this because I knew that it was going to be like exactly what I wanted to see, of just like a simple, straightforward shot framing the mountain with the cloud on the top. If I were to try and change it, maybe I could take a little bit more time and try and like make sure I was dead center. I had done my best. However, I do think that this barrier on the left is a little bit at a different angle than this barrier on the right, and it's not immediately noticeable, but to me it is. And I think if I were to try and improve this image, that's probably the change I would try and make. If I had a tilt shift lens, I think that would help get the geometry like really perfect, but yeah, I didn't, so did my best. All right, next image. As I mentioned for the last one, I was excited taking it. This image, honestly, I'm like really surprised by. I was taking it because originally I was trying to get a panorama, so there was this image and then another image facing towards the left, in that direction, and there was another image facing towards the right. However, the image to the left had some farming equipment in it, that was like really bright and vibrantly colored and kind of threw off the whole scene. So actually, I just edited this image and I actually really ended up liking it. I like the tones. I like the color palette that's in it. It's a very simple palette, and I think it works really, really well for the scene in a way that I wasn't really expecting. When I took it, it was just kind of like a spur of the moment. Hey, this is a pretty nice scene, and yeah, I like the fall off that the fog offers up at the top here, and yeah, I think it was a really nice image from our day at Maikines. So this next image, this was actually the same day as the last one. This was as we were leaving Maikines, and this one I distinctly remember taking, and I was so excited. We were on the ferry leaving Maikines back for the mainland of the islands, and the weather had been kind of honestly brutal all day. It was super windy, super cloudy, kind of just tough. And as we were passing like the coast of Maikines, there were a ton of whitecaps in the sea, and it was just I knew it was going to be a nice image, and I am really happy with the result. I love the fog on the top half. I love the kind of interest in the foreground, in like the whitecaps and the sea being like rough and like rugged. I just really, really like the like overall look, and I like the way that there's like specks of white in the foreground that complement the specks of white on the rocks, which are the rocks in the background of the scene. I think it works really well. If I were to try and change this in any way, immediately off the top of my head, I can't really think of one. And as I mentioned, because of the kind of like speed thing, I'm going to keep it moving. But yeah, really, really happy with this one. Okay, now I'd say, I think this is image number 4. Yeah. So now we're at the four images that I really, really like. And these are the images that like I'm just super proud of. So this one, I think it was over. I think it was over. Yeah, Kvikvik, which I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. If any Faroese people are watching this, I apologize. But yeah, this was the viewpoint there, and the night we took this was awesome. Sophie and I had been relaxing at the hotel because we were both feeling sick, and then we looked at the live cams in Faro, saw that the sunset here was looking really nice, and this was like an hour and a half before sunset, and then decided, you know what, like, screw it, let's go check it out. I'm so glad that we did. The conditions were phenomenal. There was beautiful fog that we were driving through, beautiful clouds over the harbors and the fjords, and yeah, I really like this image. I think it's simple. I like the way that like the lines from like either edge of the screen or of the image kind of bring you into the little town, like right in the center of it, right beneath the clouds. And yeah, I think it works. I think the lighting's nice. I think there's like a nice hint of color gradient on like right here, like the belt of Venus. And yeah, I think it's a nice image. Then, as you saw a minute ago, there's another image that we took while out there, and this one is the image that started the whole trip. This is Černovic, and this is where Sophie had seen an image of this town and was like, I want to go there. And I was like, let's make it happen. And after we both kind of like looked into it and like figured it out, we decided that like this was a trip we could make happen, and it was awesome. And this was like, there's a hike that like takes you like way up into the valley behind the town, and I like this image a lot. I think if there was a part of it that I was gonna change, it would be this piece of like little metal right here. Like I'd maybe have tried to like move it. However, as it's part of like this person's property and it's like their farming equipment, I didn't really feel right moving it, and I didn't think it was like my place to move it, so I left it in. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a rock solid image. I think that the rock wall kind of like brings you into here, and then like the town kind of brings you over to here, and then the road brings you up here to this big bank of clouds, which I think is like really nice dynamic like way to lead the viewer's eye through the image, and one that I'm really happy with. Hello again. This time I am not in the BPL. I'm actually just back at home. After that last section was recorded about the image over Czechnovic, I was kicked out of the library because they were shutting it down because of the heat. So now I did record a little quick ending there, but I figured that I'd rather actually just record like a nice thorough ending about the last two images here. So this image, I think this is probably the most dramatic and stunning image of the whole trip. This was from the second night we were there, the first full day, and the weather was really nice all day long, and then at the very, very end of the day, it got super cloudy, and I remember I told Sophie, I was like, I don't think that this is going to be a nice sunset. And we drove around anyways, took a couple images that I was happy with, and then as we were driving through the tunnel, coming back to Gasa Dolor, I noticed like pink right on the top of the clouds as we were leaving the tunnel, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then we turned out of the tunnel and we got to see the view, and it was spectacular. And I remember we got to watch, and I have photographs showing the transition from the clouds being behind the cloud bank to peeking out through the image and through the like sky, breaking the clouds. So back to the image. Yeah, I think it's a really great image. I think I like the way that like the light works for the image. I think I really liked it, and I tried to kind of like focus the viewer's eye towards like this very, very center of the frame. I really like the leading lines from the bottom left corner, bringing you up through the scene towards the cliff, and then just back out through the rest of the image. I think it really works. And honestly, there's not much to it compositionally. It's a pretty simple image. I just kind of focused on the scene, snapped and fired away, and I think the result worked. Now, for the piece de resistance, my best image, I think, of the trip. This is the one I've called the European cousin, which is because it's a Highland cow, and I have another image from a recent trip of mine of some American cows, and yeah, I just thought it was pretty funny. I think there's a lot about this image that works. I like the layers. There's to me, there's three distinct ones. We have this bottom layer of the mud, middle layer with obviously the subject and the grass the subject's eating and grazing on in the bottom middle, and then the rest of it is just this uniform empty fog, which I really like, and I really like the way that it looks. So yeah, it's simple, and I think it works. So alright, well, thanks for joining, and thanks for watching me ramble about 13 images that I took on my most recent trip. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think about the images, and if there's any that you disagree or think I'm being too harsh, or if there's any where you kind of see where I'm coming from. So thanks so much.